This is Me Before Mom, the podcast that helps moms stay connected to themselves while doing the most important job they'll ever have. And I'm your host, Bert Anderson. Hey guys, it's Bert. You are listening to Me Before Mom. So today I want to talk about social justice and kids. And how do we, as parents, help raise up the next generation of white children to see the injustices around them? I am going to tell you that I am not an expert on this at all, and there's a ton of information out there. But one thing that, as I've been looking into this and trying to figure out how to do it for my kids, is just having the discussion is good enough. You don't have to be an expert to talk to your kids and acknowledge what they're seeing, especially if you have older kids. So my son is 11 and a half years old. He heard about what happened to George Floyd, I think from a friend. And he came home and kind of brought it up to me and stuff, but then he was wrestling with his sister, and she was sitting on top of him or doing something because they were wrestling, and he just kept saying, I can't breathe, and I freaked out. Came in mama bear, you have to get off when somebody says stop or they can't breathe, you have to get off of them. And then I sound more calm now than I did. At the time, I was not calm. And so after a few minutes, I reconvened with them and said, guys, I'm sorry I freaked out. This is what's going on right now. When I heard you saying I can't breathe, it triggered something in me. And I want you guys, I want you to understand what's happening in the world right now. Of course, my 6-year-old and 9-year-old could not fathom that a policeman would be who's supposed to protect people, how this would result in, killing a man. My 11 and a half year old understood the racial dynamics of the situation because he's older. And, we've talked about it here and there. So his preschool teacher did a really cool thing when he was in preschool. It was for Martin Luther King Day. They were learning about Martin Luther King Jr. And she had everybody who had blue eyes stand on one side of the room, and then everyone who had brown eyes stand on the other side of the room. And this is, obviously this was for preschoolers. But then she started showing them, by giving the blue-eyed children candy, how unfair that felt to the brown-eyed kids. My son has hazel eyes, so he counted in the brown-eyed group. And then the next day she switched. And so then the brown-eyed children were the ones who kind of got preferential treatment, and the blue-eyed kids. And that was just a very basic, small way of explaining to 4 and 5-year-olds the concept of racism and what it looks like and how hurtful it can feel and stuff. So he's kind of understood this, and we've talked about it a few times. We took a family trip out east, and my husband and my son went to Gettysburg, the battlefield, and had a huge, long discussion about the Civil War, why it happened, who was fighting for what, and what was at stake. And so he gets it, he gets it from a head mindset. But then George Floyd was murdered, and he has not seen the video. At least I don't think he has. I mean, I can't watch my kid 24/7, and who knows, maybe his friends have shown him. But one of the things that we did, it was like the Saturday after the murder, they had tons of press conferences that were happening with the Minneapolis mayor and the different, state representatives and state senators and stuff. And we watched the coverage, and they had all sorts of religious leaders that were there talking about things. And so all of our kids watched it. And it brought up questions, and we answered them. And I guess what I'm trying to say to you, because I've looked up like how to make your kids, how to make your white children understand racism, and how to, what books should my children be reading, or should I be reading to understand social justice? And I think because we've been able to be still long enough to understand that we don't have anything happening right now. And so when George Floyd was murdered, there was, the only thing that people could do is acknowledge and see what happened and kind of stand in their uncomfortableness. And when I say people, I mean white people. But we had to look at it, and we had to be confronted with it. And I think being uncomfortable and talking about feeling uncomfortable with your children is part of the process. Explaining to my white son that as of right now, if he were an adult or a teenager and he got pulled over by a cop, right now in 2020, he would be treated completely differently than, a Black young adult male being pulled over by the cops. It's not that it's just, it's solely based on a perception and the skin color. And I don't know, guys, it's hard. The more I've been looking just into racism and learning about things like racial covenants or, redlining, and just the very seemingly minute ways that racism is still alive today, brings to light how in the dark I was as a white suburban mom. So there are different things that we've done, especially with our oldest. So we went downtown to Lake Street and helped collect donations at a church that is right by the post office that was burned down. So we took him there. He worked that whole morning, loading things and sorting canned goods and things like that. We walked over to the post office. We had a lot of conversations about the graffiti that he saw, what different things mean, why it was, just how unjust things were, and with George Floyd, and the fact that it just caused this, I want to say almost righteous anger, not trying to like the looting and all that stuff that happened. I'm not talking about that. But the peaceful protests, like trying to explain that to my 11-and-a-half-year-old has been a humbling experience. But I think it's okay that I'm not an expert in this with him, because we need to have the conversation, because silence is more damaging than trying to say the right thing but then not saying the right thing. I think especially in Minnesota, we're all very passive aggressive. We don't talk about those yucky things because it's uncomfortable. There are a lot of like Netflix has collected a group of Black films that people can watch. We watched Remember the Titans with our kids recently. And, you know, that especially for my 6-year-old was, you know, didn't make a lot of sense. Like, why won't she shake his hand? And, you know, because young children are so literal, and you know, I have a friend whose son was very, very literal, and they were a very health conscious family, and they were at a doctor's office, and the nurse walked in, and she was overweight, and her son looked at the nurse and was like, "You're fat." And, you know, his mom, she was mortified, absolutely mortified. She's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. No, you don't say that. You don't ever say that." And the nurse handled it beautifully. She said, "No, it's okay." And she looked at the son and she was like, "You know what? I am. And I need to work on that." It's the same thing like when my kids were little and they would see somebody smoking. And they, you know, were trying to be quiet, but they were doing the whisper, loud voice, like, "Mom, that person is smoking." And they could say it like super duper loud. And you're like, "Oh my goodness, be quiet. Shh." So I found that with my young girls, kind of being a little more frank that, you know, some people view Black people as bad or not good enough, and that is not okay. That sometimes is enough because they can't handle like a long, hour-long discussion about racism in America. They just can't. They don't have the attention span. So it's taking those little opportunities that present themselves and being willing to go there and sit in that, you know, kind of humbling and just awkwardness of it. And I don't think, as a parent, I don't think you have to have this all figured out right now to talk to your kids about it, because it's relevant and they're seeing it, and their friends, especially if they're older, their friends are talking about it. And staying silent is not going to help the problem. I don't know about you, but I see what's happening right now, and I think, okay, like now is the time. Enough is enough. We're all quiet because we've been in lockdown. We're just finally kind of entering into the world, but things are never going to be the same. And I don't think that's a bad thing. You know, there's a bunch of different articles out there on like books to read to your children so they understand racism, what it looks like, segregation, history. You know, it's also allowing your kids to, you know, there's this doll that my daughter really wanted, and the doll is Black. And she desperately wanted this. So of course we bought it. But I do remember a time when I was younger that if I had a Black doll, if I brought it over to a friend's house, it kind of would have been like, "Why do you have a Black doll?" And it's like, well, why wouldn't I? Because why not? So our world is coming along, and we're getting there. But I think as moms, we have to talk about the different things that we see that aren't right with the world. You know, the different marketing brands, logos, and all of that stuff is kind of being put away. But I think we need to be willing to do more than just sit back and let, you know, the big public displays of we're changing as a culture. Like, you know, we're getting rid of Aunt Jemima. That's great. But that it doesn't stop there, and it can't stop there. And that's what I'm trying to explain to my kids. Is like, I do not want for this to have happened and they focus on it for 2 weeks and then it just disappears in the news cycle, and so we're not going to talk about it anymore. I want to expose them to as many cultures as I can and introduce them to different ideas and thoughts, because the world is not white. We do not live in a white world. And it's a good thing. Thank God we don't live in like a completely white world. The world is so big and so colorful and wonderful, and I don't want for my children to miss that because I was afraid to bring up the elephant in the room. So I wish I could be a real expert with you guys, and I wish I could be like, yes, I have all the answers. I don't. As of right now, I don't have the answers. Maybe one day I will, and I'll tell you guys exactly what you should do. Just think of this as like two friends sitting and drinking coffee together and talking about how are we going to make a difference. And as I go on this process, I will share whatever I can with you guys, because there are a lot of really cool resources out there if you look for them. There are a lot of people who have made really good courses. They've written books to really help us get to the heart issue of this. And I keep talking about that if anything is going to change, it has to change at the heart level. So walk along with me, and let's not be silent about it, and accept our imperfections, help our kids see social injustice when it's there, not shy away from it, and understand, in all of this, that we're still learning and we're still figuring things out, and we're going against what we've been taught and what culture has, what we've seen. So it's hard to not be kind to yourself in this, because there's a lot of guilt that goes into it, but you should be kind to yourself. Be kind with your emotions, be kind with your children's emotions, how you explain things to them, but just be willing to have the conversation. We have to have the conversation. We can't just sit silently anymore. That's not okay. So above all else, be kind to yourself. Always be kind.
That's all we have. Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to connect with me on bertmanderson.com, and please visit our website, matriarchdm.com, for all of the show notes and to hear other awesome podcasts.